This Driving Thoughts episode is called Why Would People Rather Suffer Than Change? And I observe this constantly every day, no matter where I go. I see people who are unhappy. Their health isn't good. Their social circle isn't good. They have limited skills in education, so they're not really moving upward in life. Maybe they hate their jobs. Maybe they don't like the marriage or the relationship they're in. But it's amazing to me, amazing is the word too, how many people will stay in a situation and suffer rather than change. And I had a chance to do some thinking today because I was sitting around waiting for something that I had to stay and sit there and wait for. So I was just thinking about this concept. And I think it comes down to three things why people would suffer rather than change. And I analyze things like this because I've done my suffering in my life. I've come up with a scarcity and poverty mentality. Most of my life, I didn't have two nickels to rub together. I've made every business and relationship and health and financial mistake somebody can make. And the only reason why I'm not sleeping on a park bench or in jail is probably because I had the desire to not stay where I was at. So I did learn from my mistakes. Every time I would do something wrong, I would say, well, I'm not doing that again. And I usually didn't. So I think that's the biggest factor for me. I wasn't smarter than anybody else. And I didn't have any, I think I couldn't leverage my parents' wealth or connections or even their experience, quite frankly. But I didn't want to stay where I was at. It was non-negotiable. But I see so many people today that would rather stay where they're at than change. And a lot of them are actually suffering. We live in a very unhealthy country. I can only speak for the United States. I don't know what's going on in, Canada or Mexico or Russia or China or India, but in the United States, we live in a physically and a financially unhealthy country. The cost of healthcare in this country keeps going up because so many people need to use it. That's why it's getting so expensive. Plus, it is overpriced. The other thing is, roughly half of Americans today are living paycheck to paycheck or at or near the poverty line. I think pretty much 2/3 of people that are over the age of 60 have no idea how they're going to retire. But these people have lived their whole lives, struggling, miserable, suffering, and they don't change. And why is that? I just can't figure it out. And I thought about it today, and I think there's three basic reasons. And one is obvious. The most obvious one is fear. They're either afraid they can't do it. They're afraid of what people around them are going to say if they try to do it. They're afraid of what will happen if they do succeed. What's on the other side? They're afraid of success, but they're just afraid. They're just so afraid of change that they would rather stay where they're at and suffer. And I think it really is one of the biggest reasons why. I think another reason why is literally, I think, a lack of awareness. I just don't think a lot of these people know what life has to offer and what's out there and how easy it is to change and how realistic it is to acquire the life and the feeling that you want. I really believe that there are people out there that are just they have been raised in such I hate to say this word, it sounds like a mean word, but in such an ignorant way that they literally have no idea and no belief that their life could be any different than it is. And it's a shame because that couldn't be further from the truth. And I think the third reason people stay where they're at and suffer rather than change is what's called sunk cost bias. And I was reading this book. It was called Essentialism, and I think it's a really good book. And I love it because it touched on a lot of my own personal nerves, and I've been guilty of sunk cost bias at times. And sunk cost bias means that you won't quit doing something because you have so much time, money, or emotion invested in it that you just don't want to let it go. My wife and I just moved, and we did purge a lot of things, but we brought so much stuff to our house that we should have thrown out. But my wife just couldn't let it go not because she was ever going to use it again. We don't have any kids. It's not like we're going to give it to our kids someday. Someday, all we were really doing was delaying the process of throwing it out. That's all. But she just couldn't get the nerve up to throw it out. Like, things that belong to her mother, for instance, that I know she's never going to use. And we're not even displaying it in a showcase or on a wall. It just went in a box and it's just taking up space in our basement. But she can't throw it out because she's so emotionally attached to it. When I was reading this book about sunk cost bias, they used the example of the Concorde jet project. It was this kind of triangular shaped supersonic jet, and it was supposed to fly from New York to Paris in like 2 hours. And it was a joint venture between England and France. And they eventually got the thing flying, but the project ran over the budget by billions and billions of dollars, and it actually lost money to operate it. But the French and British government had so much money invested in it, they were afraid to shut the project down because they were going to get so much egg on their face, and they didn't want to be embarrassed, and they didn't want to walk away from all that money they invested. So they literally kept running it at a loss. They just kept suffering financially rather than cut their losses. And I see this all the time. I see people operating businesses that are losing money or wasting time on things that I know will never get them the goal they want, or staying in relationships that will never give them the relationship satisfaction and the security that they want, but they just stay because they have so much invested. And I think that's a big reason why people will stay in a situation where they're suffering because they have so much invested. They're a victim of sunk cost bias. And I think also fear goes with that sunk cost bias because they're afraid of what people are going to say if they do get out of that relationship or quit that job or, stop funding something or stop putting time in something. They're afraid to cut certain friends loose, even though they know these friends aren't good for them, but they're afraid that these friends will get mad at them. I don't know. I hope you listen to this podcast episode, maybe assess your own life and ask yourself if there's anything in your life that is causing you grief or stress or anxiety or negative feelings, even if it's affecting your health, why are you continuing to suffer? Ask yourself that. Is it because you're afraid of something? Is it because you're just not even aware that there's a better way to do it? Because I have talked to people that are suffering from stuff, and I encourage them to change, and they literally say to me, well, what else would I do? What else is there? There's nothing else out there for me, I hear that a lot when people stay in bad relationships. They're like, well, I don't think I can find anybody else, which is baloney. There's 300 and some million people in this country. Roughly half of them are men and half of them are women. And so it doesn't matter whether you're in a same-sex relationship or a heterosexual relationship. There are a lot of fish in the sea. You will find somebody else, trust me. But they stay because they literally are so afraid they can't find somebody else. So I would ask you, step back and assess your life. And is there something that's negative in your life? And assess why you keep, staying with it. I mean, is it fear? Is it that you don't believe there's a different way or something else to do? Is it sunk cost bias because you're too afraid to walk away from what you have invested in it? So I hope this helps you do some thinking and make some changes.